even though it hasn't quite been 15 minutes. But so we're going to have 4 respondents this afternoon. So our first one is Ahmed Amer, who is Associate Professor of Computer Science and Engineering at Santa Clara University. He is also a faculty scholar at the Markova Center for Applied Ethics. He is chair of Silicon Valley chapter of IEEE, Society for Societal Impacts of Technology, and is a scholar of Aspen Institute's Aspen Tech Policy. He also serves on the board of the International Association of Computing and Philosophy. While his research focuses on systems topics, particularly operating systems, distributed systems, and data storage systems, he's also chaired the International Conference on Massive Storage Systems and Technology. His interests also include the intersection of technology and society, and in particular ethical issues involving computer systems. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brady. Well, your warm welcome humbles me and makes this part really difficult because I have to start with an admission, and that is that I was terrified when I was given what seems like an impossible assignment. Because I have to explain. I'm a computer scientist by education. I'm an engineer in the sense that I'm a kind of applied computer scientist. So I'm about the science and the math and the machines and the silicon, right? And my perspective comes as a technologist who looks on a certain, how should I put this, with certain frustration when an ethicist would talk about technology and screw it up and say things about it that are wrong or naive. Professor Green is the complete opposite of that, in that his commentary and views are always born from a place above reproach. So when I was told you are to be a respondent to Brian's talk, I was like, I'm sure I will find no fault. And indeed that is in fact true. But my admissions do not end there. I must also admit that I come here to speak from a place of ignorance. And here's the really bad part. Your graciousness and kindness in welcoming me prompts me to admit that I'm proud of my ignorance and I seek it. So what do I know? Well, so I come from a different place as a technologist, but I also come from an Islamic background where there are no clerics. We come up with a little trick where the name we use for the divine is almost always a superlative of a virtue. So it's always that unattainable thing just beyond the horizon, which makes life quite easy because it means embracing one's ignorance about the nature of the divine helps you avoid a lot of confusion, right? But it meant that in Brian's talk, the nature of the gods, the exceeding of the wattage of Thor was particularly appealing because while I would come to it from a different perspective, I don't think you disagree that it can also be perceived as not us superseding the gods, but refining and redefining our definition of what is the divine, pushing it a little further beyond a particular 2400 watt a day situation. So when I say I embrace that ignorance, I'm referring actually to what I hope is a technologically earned humility, so to speak. So there was a reference to a certain techno-optimist manifesto, which I would argue is in fact a manifesto of despair and limited vision. But because it does not embrace this uncertainty, this doubt, as something to go towards. So the unknown nature of gods is probably the only way I can find something to respond to this wonderful talk with some kind of disagreement. But it's not really disagreement, it's merely a contention that dish brain isn't special, it's just wet. Right? Okay, what do I mean? Why is it more special because it is merely built of cells? If I come to it from that perspective, am I not coming to it from a presumption that I am already special because I also am very wet electronics apparently. All right. So is this not a little bit hubristic of me? Should I not show the humility of doubting whether or not I am in fact special? So that's really the only avenue in which I could come at this from. But it's not disagreement. Because it really isn't a disagreement with your thesis at all. It's merely a way of reconciling it to a different perspective. And I would argue it reconciles it to the perspective of the little guy who I believe I have often caused you frustration by arguing for this particular little guy. And of course, with the little guy I refer to is the machine's perspective on this whole are machines alive and are humans special discussion. Because who am I to say I am more important than a particular machine? Okay, perhaps I'm overdoing it a little bit here. But I actually find that is easy to reconcile, even if I am coming from a position where I choose not to believe in a divine, or I have problems accepting it entirely, because I could look at theology as not so much the study of God, but if I look at it as the study of the traditions we wish to inherit, the default settings and instinct we wish to pass on to future generations, then am I not looking at the question of what's the right firmware to put in future generations? So, yeah, oh God, I'm not seeming very special compared to the machine now, am I? So, if the theology we embrace is in fact the firmware of our society, in the big machine in which we are a part, are we really special? I get that this might not be a very optimistic or positive view of ourselves as humanity, but I hope to convince you that, in fact, far from disagreeing with the statement that God has a lot of faith in humanity, let's not let God down, I am in fact agreeing with it, like rephrasing that question. I find the questions of is a machine alive to be honestly trite and annoying, because that isn't really the point. A colleague of mine once mocked me when he got a voice assistant, and yes, to refer to the beautiful slide of the lonely man with his iPhone brightening up his life. If I may put it to you that man's life would not be brightened by an iPhone, but instead a voice assistant who could lovingly turn on the lights for him and respond to his commands, and that might be better. Okay, maybe not better. But the colleague who made fun of me because it was my first experience with a voice assistant. He showed me what it can do, and I asked it to turn on the lights for me. It did, and I promptly said thank you. And of course, my colleague was like, "What? What is wrong with you?" And I was like, well, hang on. So I had to think fast to save myself from further embarrassment. And my response was, "Oh, no, I did that on purpose." I didn't, it was instinctive. But I did that on purpose, and the reason I did it was I don't want to be the kind of person who asks for something, gets it, and is then discourteous and impolite. I don't want to mess up my firmware regarding automatic polite responses to nice things being done for you. Right? Oh, see, great save, right? But why is that point? The point I'm trying to make is that something like that Techno-Optimist Manifesto starts from the place of, yeah, not only that we are special, not only that we can fix it, but that we can get to that horizon and be done. I find that an incredibly despairing perspective, which is contradicted by Brian's conclusion that we should not let God down. So couple that with the vision of divinity as a point beyond the horizon, and then Brian, what you are telling me is that I should never give up. I should keep on going. And it's perfectly compatible with the scientific view where I should be open to revising my thesis to new evidence all the time. And also, it's very compatible with the mathematical view that there are limits to what we can know. And yes, I should have explained what kind of computer scientist I am. I jokingly mentioned a little earlier that I describe my interest in data storage technologies, for example, as I like to figure out ways to make memories tangible and preserve them, because that sounds a lot cooler than saying, hey, I like how magnets work, right? But in truth here, if we start from a point of view of saying, are we special or not? There's a certain humility to that. If we start from the point of view of asking, not is the machine alive, but are we truly human or special in comparison, there is a certain humility to that that creates a certain void or ignorance we can run towards. So, Brian, forgive me, I will try to wrap up with that I would put it to you that no, we are not special. No, we do not have to think of it necessarily as us letting God down, but perhaps we can think of it as, are we in fact the humans we believe ourselves to be? And that in saying that, I'm not disagreeing with you, but merely offering a perspective that is compatible with your wonderful thesis for those who might approach it from a different way. And so another way to think about that is also to say, I would argue we are not special if we presume we are, which is, I guess, a logician's nightmare of a statement because it creates a paradox. But I would argue that paradoxes are fine. In fact, we are paradox-driven, or as perhaps Rumi would put it, the builder looking for the hole in the roof to fix it. We cast our nets into the abyss because we are drawn to that hole. I'm, of course, butchering it with a pretty bad translation of an otherwise beautiful poem there. But I would say being attracted to that ignorance, to that gap, is another way of being true to the hopeful message with which you have. I'm deeply, deeply honored to be here among you and to respond to such a wonderful thesis. I hope you don't take my assertion that fish brain is not special, just wet, as too much of a coincidence.
Yes, Brian, so you have time to respond now?
Sure. Should Ahmed stay there and I stay here,
Or I could move next to you.
Yeah, let me zoom out on the
Okay.
camera. We'll get you both in frame there. Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so you can notice here.
Oh,
There we go.
thank you, Billy.
All right. So, first of all, thank you very much. That was fantastic. You were the second technologist this week to tell me that I shouldn't think that much of dish brain, which is interesting. The other one said something very similar to yours, which is that this is life which is being put in the service of machines, and therefore it's just acting the way that a machine would work, which might not be exactly what you were saying. What do you think of that?
No. I would push back on that criticism being directed at you, because I would argue that you are right to call it special, but perhaps not for the reason that it is in fact special.
Okay.
So if you remember the RoboDog, with everybody kicking it and getting back up.
Yes.
Yeah, and you look at that and you're like, oh, the poor thing. And then you want to kick yourself for thinking the poor thing, because batteries and servos, what poor thing? What exactly? But actually, that reaction, the poor thing reaction, is valuable. Right? It is an expression of empathy towards something that looks human, but guards us against an expression of callousness to the things that are alive. So when you say this brain is special, you're reminding us that it is very similar to us. We are taking something that is similar to us and applying it in a technological way that behooves us to really think what we do. Well, that's true of any technology. You're not wrong to say that it's a special kind of affinity to us that may have special value in prompting that consideration, even if it is just by electronics.
Yeah, and what you just said there, I appreciated the idea of using empathy as the kind of a, it's a safeguarding callousness ultimately, which is that you want to. It's better to be too empathetic perhaps than it is to be not empathetic enough and then driven to callousness. if empathy would be, I guess empathy, I suppose, would be a virtue. Would it be a virtue? I mean, probably a virtue between callousness and would be too much empathy. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, it's good programming for the big machine that we are parts of, right? Because you talked at the end about building an ethical society out of unethical people.
Right.
So yeah, think of empathy more like good programming for the little cogs to care about the big thing.
Yeah.
Because I'm really digging into that word not special.
Let's see, what else? Oh, it would be really easy to go off on Mark Anderson, but I think we should avoid him. It's too easy, right?
Well, okay, allow me to go off on somebody else then in that
Okay.
regard. So there was a recent talk, I won't name who made it. It was a TED talk about AI. The person in there went and said, yeah, we can figure out the human brain to the point where we can program an AI to be as good as a good person or something to that effect. And the sheer arrogance of oversimplifying the level of ignorance we have about neuroscience and cognitive science into the, oh yeah, that's that goal we're just programmed towards, was staggering. But I'm not trying to just badmouth the person. That was an example of somebody ignorant of what they were ignorant of. The second order of these things is helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, it's recognizing when done humility is certainly a very important thing to do. All right, I'm just going to keep track of the time. So, Craig, are we?
Until 2 o'clock.
Oh, until 2 o'clock.
I mean,
Okay.
if you want to continue to open up conversation to other questions, you're able to, but.
Yeah, I mean, why don't we start opening it up then? I think it would be great to get more audience involved. And I'm sorry that my talk ran a little bit over, so we ran out of time to have a conversation.
No, it wasn't scheduled that way. You didn't miss anything.
Oh, okay.
I will keep an eye on the Zoom chat as well if there are things that come in there.
So audience participation, Peter.
Yeah, I was confused about one thing you said, just a term. Was it epistemological vulcanization?
Oh, vulcanization.
Okay.
So vulcanization is in vulcanizing and breaking into smaller and smaller countries.
Yeah, I was trying to figure out how tires got into it.
Vulcanization, that would be interesting.
So, I want to challenge you a little bit in that Elizabeth Eisenstein, who was a great historian of printing and wrote The Printing Revolution, The Printing Press as an Agent of Change in Europe, talks about how one of the interesting dimensions of the development of print is that it broke down local ties and increased international ties. And she points out that, for example, in the days when the local lord couldn't read, he would go to the clerk who could read, just as the shoemaker would go to the clerk. And so there was a local solidarity based on illiteracy. When literacy came in, the educated lord had far more in common with people across Europe than with the local people. And she points out that, I think this was in respect to a scientific text on plants. Suddenly people in Sweden or Greece or in Scandinavia and Spain would be doing the same woodcut, reading about the same plant. So in that sense, print is like the internet in that I can be in a safe way reading something that somebody else in Europe or Argentina or Australia has an interest in, but the person next to me at the checkout counter has no interest in. So like print, it's building up international alliances, commonality, community, while not necessarily breaking down the local, but I think there's a parallel. And so I'm wondering whether you think the internet is different, not in kind, or not in principle, but simply in degree.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, because very often when we're using the internet, it's just another form of text, right? So maybe it's a growth of the reading specified texts that we used to have access to because we're now at a much larger scale. Yeah, that's an interesting one.
But I wanted to tie it in with your fifth. What did you call those 7 things? The challenges?
Yes. Challenges.
Yes, the fifth provocation about tradition, story, and work.
Yes.
Belonging in community versus aloneness. I know lots of people who are housebound, but whose connection to the outside world is through the internet, is through their community. And I'm wondering if you want to comment on not the negativity of a guy sitting alone with his device, but who's sitting alone but communicating with people across the world who are part of a much wider virtual community.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you're exactly right. So I was probably being unfair to the technology there, because there's certainly a balance to it. I would say there are certain circumstances. So, for example, let's take a stereotypical teenager who spends all of their time staring at a particular video game. And if it's a solo video game, then of course they're playing by themselves. But very often they're not solo video games. They're there with their friends and things like that. So I think this gets into the question of the very broad spectrum of uses that technology can have. You're right that it can be helpful in some ways and not helpful in other ways. Yeah.
But point out in your defense the price paid per word versus the accessibility of preserving the word and transmitting it digitally is very different. So you could look at a woodcut of a farm all across Europe, but there would be arguably fewer woodcuts of abominable snowman or things like that. Sasquatch, or less gossip.
So let me see if I understand. Are you saying that electronic storage is so much less expensive that we get a much more frivolous storage? Yes.
I hear so.
Okay. Yes, I think I can agree with that one.
If you have to ration your photos, you will take better photos. If you can have an unlimited, no real database, you wind up with lots of bathroom selfies.
Yeah, I mean, so that's yeah, there's a lot of trade-offs, I guess, that comes to technology, because you're right, it certainly helps in certain circumstances, but the question is also if it can substitute for something that you should be having. So, for example, last night in the talk, we talked about the substitute chatbot girlfriend or whatever it was, right? And the idea that this is if these sorts of chatbots, they're great for dealing with loneliness, but on the other hand, maybe they are actually deflecting the person away from where they should be going with their loneliness, which is towards other human beings, because ultimately the chatbot is only going to be on your phone. It's never going to actually give you what you're looking for. It's just kind of a diversion. It's giving you something like, I guess cotton candy when you want to be eating like real food.
Good presentation, good response. Thanks for getting us going. I appreciated the section, especially where you were talking about teenagers, community, and why there seems to be loneliness and all that kind of thing. A couple generations ago, Clara shut down Roman Catholic, and Sri Aurobindo, the New Ager, both were looking forward to the future with an increased shared consciousness. And in their respective visions, this would create increased harmony. So the noosphere for TR is approaching spiritualization, it's approaching sanctification, and all of these kinds of things. Now, recently, people have speculated that the internet looks like an electronic version of the noosphere, or the spiritualization of matter. But just the opposite seems to be happening. We're experiencing more division and more separation and even verbal violence, etc. How do you analyze this? Is it a mistake to associate the digital world with what Taynard or Sriel Bindo were looking forward to? Is that the mistake? Or is human nature such that we're going to find new ways to be divisive, sinful, and nasty? We just have greater opportunity to resist being sanctified, communified, and resist being loving to our neighbor. So how do you analyze the internet in light of these philosophical prognostications?
So that's a great one, and I'll be different ways. Do you want to go first, Ahmed, or should I go first?
We should presume that yeah, so the internet as amplifier of our worst tendencies is not entirely a function of the fact that that is our true nature, right? That we presume that its structure is such that it brings out what we really are. But if it's instead a light that brings out high contrast, but at the same time attracts attention to the contrast, then it actually amplifies that. Now, is that because we are like that, or is it helping us become more like that? Personally, I believe the latter. I know that sounds weird from a technologist I do, but I only believe the latter because if you can say something unbelievably vile with absolutely no consequence, or with absolutely no association with your real physical self in the world, is that vile? Am I providing you with a forum to communicate, or am I providing you with a forum to project your darkest dreams and worst nature upon others? Don't get me wrong, I'm not here arguing for more censorship and moderation. All I'm saying is the structure and the way we interact with it and the ease of certain things like being able to throw a word out there onto an ad-subsidized platform that nominally connects us all, but is really an advertising platform, has a bad outcome. And that shouldn't then be read in this pessimistic way that, oh my God, we are so awful. Our darkest corners are dark. That's all we've had.
Yeah, I agree, I think, with what you're saying, Ahmed, because this reminds me of the fact that, lots of studies have been done looking at YouTube, for example, and the fact that YouTube is constantly sending you towards more extreme content, because that's what keeps your eyeballs looking at YouTube. And as long as your eyeballs are looking at YouTube, they are making revenue on the ads that they are selling. So, in contrast, you could look at something like the way that China is handling this, which is to have active censorship all the time. And what the active censorship does is it contains the narrative in a particular direction. You're getting rid of anything that might be a divergent story. You're trimming everything. How many people here have watched Loki, the TV show? Okay, not that many. Anyway, there's a organization in the Loki TV series which is constantly trimming off the alternate futures to prevent those from happening. And by continuously trimming everything out, there's just one timeline that everybody has to follow. And this way, you can structure your internet or information system in that way, in the way China's doing it. Whereas in the United States, we're doing the opposite, right? We're diverging people as much as possible so that they can really get the most extreme version of whatever they are interested in, and it's for the sake of money. So ultimately, this is the way the system has been set up. The technology isn't necessarily going to do that, but it does result in society being stretched in a way that hasn't been stretched before.